For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Not death pains, not the pains of death that looks back and anticipates an ending, but the pains of childbirth that look forward and anticipate a beginning. Childbirth can be much more painful. I don't say this from experience, but nonetheless, it can be much more painful than a death experience, but it looks forward to the child who is coming out of this. And this is what Jesus talked about, and talked about the anticipation and how the joy that comes overshadows the pain that led up to the joy. But the pain had a direct preparatory effect to the joy. Without the pain, the joy wouldn't have come. So it is in our lives. Verse 23, and not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as children, the redemption of our bodies. We already talked about adoption earlier in Romans 8. So how is it that we await adoption when we've already been adopted? That's the already and not yet. Yes, we've experienced it. Yes, that's our identity, but we have not yet experienced the fullness of it. That still awaits us in the world to come. And people will say, but wait a minute, our bodies are going to be destroyed and the earth is going to be destroyed. Right, but God is going to undestroy them. This is the doctrine of the resurrection. And you know what, one time I was talking about in our church, preaching from a passage in Luke where Jesus was with his disciples, and he stretches out his hands and he shows them the marks, but then he also prepares breakfast for him and says, sit down and eat with me. And he actually eats fish and he drinks, and the fish does not fall through to the ground because this is an actual body. He's not a ghost. And he says, a ghost does not have flesh and bones as I have. We're told we're going to be like Christ. His is the first fruits from the grave. Our bodies will be like his. He tells us we will have physical bodies, and physical bodies don't drift around in the clouds. They live somewhere. And so he says, we'll have a new earth that we'll live on and reign with him. And after the service, a godly man in our church, an old saint, comes up to me and he says, this is a Bible-believing man, a real student of the word. He said, are you actually saying that we'll have real bodies and that we'll eat and drink? And I said, well, yeah, that's exactly what Scripture is saying. That's what resurrection means. And he looked at me and he says, that just sounds so unspiritual. Well, that's Platonism that made us think that was unspiritual. God's the one who created the world. God's the one that came in to redeem it. But that Platonism just infects us. It's still there with some people. They think that's just not spiritual to talk about such things. You know what I've discovered? I get a lot of feedback on this because I write on this subject. Before becoming a writer, if that's your aspiration, you just might want to count the cost in advance because you just get a lot of letters, and they're not all encouraging. But what some of the people have to say is, oh, come on, you got to be kidding. This isn't. And I look at it and I go, these are people who would die, some of them, for the doctrine of the resurrection. They would die before they would deny the doctrine of the resurrection. But in actual fact, they don't believe the doctrine of the resurrection. They don't actually believe, or at least understand the meaning of what this doctrine is that they would die for.